Welcome to Ask the Latina. 4% of all executive positions are held by Hispanics, with Latinas making only 1% of the executive ranks. My guest today is a seasoned executive and an attorney who has served 2 presidential administrations and was the national director of the Minority Business Development. It is my pleasure to introduce to you my guest, Alejandra Castillo, CEO of YWCA USA.
Thank you, Terry. That's a great introduction. Just want to make sure that, as we continue this conversation, I think this program is so valuable to be able to reach young women as they are making decisions about their careers. Clearly there are so many things I wish I would have known when I was starting my career. And I think I've been committed to making sure that I can avoid those pitfalls, but also to be able to provide some guidance so that women can get even further along, and also making sure that they feel confident enough to believe that they deserve more. So I'm excited about this conversation.
Well, thank you. I am so excited to have you. Most of us Latinas are so proud of our Hispanic heritage. Could you tell us a little bit about yours, where you're from, growing up, and it'd be nice to know what inspired you also to go to college.
Yeah. So I was born in New York City from Dominican parents who came to the U.S. Basically fleeing a dictatorship. Most people don't realize, but the Dominican Republic had a dictator for over 30 years. So my parents' youth was under a dictatorship. So for them, coming to the U.S. was an opportunity to come to embrace democracy, to be able to have a voice. And as I was growing up in New York City, my parents began as janitors, right? Cleaning offices and things of the sort. And then my dad started a small business, a grocery store. We call them bodegas in New York. Mm-hmm. And I grew up, my mom would sell Avon and other like side gigs. My dad had his small business. So I really grew up in a household where owning your own business, having your own financial independence was important. But I had 2 incredible grandmothers who understood the importance of education. And my paternal grandmother, my abuela Neris, would always tell her grandkids, the first one to become a professional, I'm going to buy them a car. Now, at that moment, we didn't think grandma could buy us a new car, but we realized from her words and her passion how important education was. So I grew up, no one in my household had ever been to college, but they had always aspired to go to college. And that was, embedded on me. And I was the first to be born in the U.S., so I was the first to learn English. So there was a lot of responsibility on my shoulders. There was nothing scarier than to fail. Nothing scarier than what if I don't succeed? So that gave me the drive to work as hard and do as much, because I knew that my entire family was betting on me. So as you said, our love for family and our culture really makes us do the impossible because we don't want to let them down.
You're right. Families are so important, and the sacrifice that they've done for us is so important to realize that. You have such an amazing career, and you have really risen up the ladder in a very short amount of time. And I want to know exactly what is it that you think we should recommend with your experience to Latinas, because as I said, we only have 1% that are really in executive positions or CEOs. And, it's something that I think that any Latina should aspire to grow. We need more Latinas in leadership positions. Yeah. So what do you recommend? What is it that you feel that's something that they should learn from you?
ask for help. Very simple. Sometimes in our culture, we're very proud. We want to do it on our own. We want to prove to the world that we are strong and we can do it. But I think that what life has taught me is that you need a community. And that community comes in all sizes, shapes, and colors. So you need to, when things are rough, just ask for help, right? When I was in undergrad, there were many scholarship programs that I didn't know about. So I did not apply to them because I just didn't know about them. And then as I found them, as I discovered them, I would go to the offices and say, hey, I didn't apply for this. Is there any way, and you would ask for help. And maybe you didn't get that particular scholarship, but they would be invested in your future. And they would figure out maybe some other program. Similarly, in the workplace, I don't profess to know everything, nor should I. So when I'm given a project or a task, I want to ask for help. I don't want somebody to do the work, but I want to get guidance. I want to get the best practices. Show me where the pitfalls are. And I think that if there's anything that I would tell young Latina is, life is not about doing it on your own, like all solita, ¿verdad? You have to ask for help, ask for guidance. And then the moment you ask for help and guidance, people become invested in your future.
Did you have mentors that helped you along and when you went through this, and how did you reach out to them?
So remember what I said, there's a saying, and it's attributed to Benjamin Franklin. And it says, if you want a friend for life, ask for a favor. And the way I translate that is, if you want a friend for life, ask for help. Because once somebody is willing to invest in you, they will journey with you throughout your life until that relationship no longer exists. So I have mentors in my life, like my mentor, Mari Carmen Aponte. She's been my mentor for over 30 years. And I have mentors from every walk of my life because you need them. Again, we go back to that same principle. Life is not about journeying by yourself. You should, I'm inviting people, you should build relationships that then turn into mentorship. And the reason I say it that way is because I get a lot of young women who are like, oh, can you be my mentor? A mentor is a relationship that you have to develop over time. It's not like be my mentor and all of a sudden a magic wand. It's making sure you ask for guidance, you touch base through email, you share articles. I share articles with young girls and I say, hey, have you seen this article? It's about developing a relationship of trust. But absolutely, mentors are essential.
Right. Excellent. Now you have a BA in economics and social science and a master's in public policy and a judicial doctorate from Washington College of Law. Was becoming a lawyer the ultimate goal for you? And why did you pursue these other degrees first?
So my bachelor's, because it's the first entry point, right? And I was always fascinated by economics. I grew up in New York City, and I was always fascinated by how does money work, right? Particularly in communities of color, both the formal economy and the informal economy. Then I came to DC, and after working in the Clinton White House, actually, while I was in DC, I got a scholarship to go to grad school, and everything was paid for. So I went to the University of Texas at Austin, which was an incredible experience. And then after serving at the White House, I said I want to go and get a law degree. Now, I wanted to get the law degree before the master's, but you never turn down a scholarship. So word to the wise, never turn down a scholarship. And it was great. It was a great experience. Law school is a different educational platform. First, there are not that many scholarships. So you're going to get yourself in debt. And secondly, it's a process. It's taking the to LSATs, then going to 3 years, then taking the bar. So all of that was truly my commitment to my education, because there's so many roadblocks along the way that many people say, I'm not going to do it. But I'm very happy of the choices I made. I did spend a lot of years in school, but I have no regrets whatsoever.
That's fantastic. Yeah, you were definitely, you mentioned that you were worked in 2 different presidential administrations, and one of them was President Obama. It's where you worked as the task force, I believe, for the federal procurement for small businesses. And so you name yourself as a social innovator and a change agent. And I thought it'd be really good to understand what those mean, and what should a Latina, what skills should she have or look for, or how does she become a social innovator and a change agent?
Yeah. So, as people of color and Latinas in particular, we come to the table when the rules of engagement have already been set by somebody else. Okay. So we have to learn certain rules in order to succeed. And what I propose is sometimes we just need to throw those old rules out the door and create our own rules, because we come from so many walks of life with a different set of eyeglasses or lens that we can see the world through possibilities and not necessarily through challenges. So when I call myself a social innovator, it means that I'm looking at the world based on the possibilities that we can do something different, bigger, better, more inclusive. And when I say a change agent, I mean having the wherewithal, having the ganas to be able to be able to move institutions, organizations, governments to do better, right? It's not just accepting it. Why should we accept a broken education system? Why should we accept a broken infrastructure? When we talk about COVID, now all of a sudden people are surprised how our broadband is so weak and our education system is so weak. So I'm the type of person that I like to rock the boat. It's uncomfortable. Some people may not like me, but that's okay. As long as you're moving the needle to make society better, it's worth every moment of it.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's true. That's so true. And I feel the same way. There's a little activism in me as well. And
absolutely.
I think there needs to be a little activism in a lot of Latinas, and not even especially Latinas in higher level positions.
But I will tell you, Terry, there are some really amazing Latinas that are doing incredible work. Monica Ramirez, who is a force of nature she's talking about, and she's doing change for farm workers, for women, female farm workers, for women who have been survivors of domestic violence and sexual abuse. I mean, Monica Ramirez is incredible. Virginia Case, Puerto Riqueña, who is leading the League of Women Voters, one of the most institutional organizations in our nation, creating change, making sure that women's vote and voices are heard. Maria Teresa Kumar, who is a commentator on MSNBC, pushing the envelope. I'm thinking of Frances Colon, who is doing work in the environmental space. There are many Latinas. It's just that there's so much to do that we need more Latinas. It just cannot rest on, 50 Latinas. It has to be a massive. So I can understand why sometimes it feels like there are not enough Latinas leveraging, but I would say, look, we all have a role to play, whether it's at the national, state, local, or community level. And never underestimate your voice. It's not the title that makes your voice. It's your authenticity. It's the way you bring community together to really move the needle.
Yeah, that is so true. So, Alejandra, where do you see yourself in 5 years?
Well, hopefully in a post-COVID world where we can see each other and embrace each other and give a hug and you know, share a meal together. Where do I see myself in 5 years? That's always a great question. I would love to see myself leading a large philanthropic organization. I would love to be able to move more money into communities, to fund organizations that are doing incredible work, but oftentimes don't get the support. To be able to fund this podcast and say, hey, Terry, let's scale this. Yeah. How can I leverage other people's money to support what's needed in our community? So, you know, that is a recent dream of mine. I never thought about philanthropy, but I think that philanthropy is broken, but it could be saved if you have the right people who understand how communities work and who understand diversity.
Mm-hmm. I totally agree with that. One of the reasons that I built this program was because I saw a need. I know we call it Ask a Latina, but it's really to ask a Latina that has succeeded, because we don't have a chance, and we do trust other Latinas for advice. And so even though we're told to really get mentors that are non-Latinas, we still trust another Latina for advice. And so that's why, you know, we developed this, and it's really the growth is really to try and make sure that there's enough Latinas that go into STEM, medicine, finance, and law. And one of the things that I took an opportunity to is ask some of the students what kind of questions they'd like to ask you. So I'd like to go through some of the questions that
that'll be fun.
Yeah, and so yeah, so one of the questions that they asked was, you know, as far as being in college, how do you overcome the fact that you might be the only Latina going in the College of Law? And what gave you the drive to complete college? How do you get that drive if you see you're the only one?
That is a great question. So at the beginning of this interview, I said that my grandparents wanted their grandkids to be professionals, but nobody really knew what college was about. No one understood about SATs or applying or visiting schools. No, it was a dream, and then it was pretty much left to me to figure it out. And here's my survival mechanism is I just hunker down and do the work, because sometimes you know, absolutely you feel lonely, but I know that I hunker down and do the work and really invest myself in why I'm doing this, right? I ate a lot of cereal, a lot of Cheerios, a lot of ramen noodles, like many college students. Days that I was broke, right? I didn't have money to buy my textbooks. All of those experiences are painful at the moment, but that's what makes you. Like, that's what builds your endurance, right? Just like an athlete, they have to train every day to get those muscles going. It's unfortunate to say, but for us, that's our training. Because guess what? You may be the only one in college, but then you're going to be the only one at the C-suite, right? So you may be the only one throughout your entire career. And your job is to make sure that the next generation doesn't have to be the only one. But I will tell you that you got to stick through it. You got to stick through it and find a community so that you don't feel alone. But there will be times when the prize is bigger than the pain. And if you focus and you stay really focused, like law school was really hard for me. But it was staying the course and finding a community that would support me and mentors and friends and just saying, okay, 2 more years, 1 more year, 3 more months. And you do the countdown because unfortunately that's life. Yeah.
Yeah. And the other question I have here, it's kind of interesting. Would you ever consider becoming a state representative or go to Congress?
Like 20 years ago, I had the chance to run. Somebody said, oh, you'd be great to run. And here's a funny thing. When I realized that I could win, I understood that that's not me. I like to be a policy person. I like to be behind the scenes. The life of an elected official is grueling, grueling. It's the constant events and the constant opening your entire life up. It's being criticized constantly. Never what you do is enough. And I realized that my role could be better served by not running for office. However, I would love to see more Latinas running for office. If you think that that is what you drive and what you want and how you want to serve society, by all means, we should be supporting women to run for office. But when I did my personal analysis, I realized that it's just not my makeup. I'm a private person. I love the work I do. Yes, I do a lot of events like this, but at the end of the day, I'm made up differently. Yeah.
Wow. I think I would feel the same way. So, but definitely I support when I see Latinas running, and I do encourage them to even do something at the local level, whatever it takes. It's very important.
Yeah. Terry, right now, there's an amazing Latina. Her name is Michelle de la Isla, and she's the Latina mayor of Topeka, Kansas. And she's running for Congress. And she's a friend, and we've done events together, and I've done a fundraiser together. That's what we need to do for one another. When we have a Latina who has a big dream, our job is to support them wholeheartedly, and in whichever way we can do that. So I really hope that Michelle de la Isla makes it to Congress.
Oh, I do too. And I'm going to start following her. So that's
yeah.
to hear that. Let's see, as an attorney, what were the different experiences that you had while working on each of the sectors? You worked in public, private, and also nonprofit.
Yeah. So my first job out of law school was clerking for a DC Superior Court judge, Judge Cordero, and she was on the family calendar. And basically a lot of our cases were in the child neglect and abuse. And that was really, really hard, right? When the court has to step in, when the government has to step in to protect the interest of a child when they've been abused or neglected. And those are really hard issues to bear. But I realized that when you have a good child advocate in the courtroom, when you have the system working in a way that is really protecting the best interest of the child, you can do some incredible things. My judge was very understanding. She did her homework. She asked the tough questions, and she always would be, making sure that the child was well taken care of. And that was very interesting to me because it's about human dynamics. Whether it was issues of child neglect and abuse or divorce, relationships are challenging. And then, working in the private sector, I worked in something in an area of practice called the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. And basically it's when companies bribe officials around the world to get special contracts and things of the sort. So that was also interesting because it gave me a glimpse of how companies sometimes are bad actors, and what they do, and how we how we as the U.S. government prosecute them. And then working in both government and now in the nonprofit sector, I really think that my legal education is so versatile because I can move from one sector to the other. And at the end of the day, it's really looking at how do we legislate, and how do we create laws that are truly fair and equitable. I always say, don't pay attention to those ugly lawyer jokes. We need more lawyers who are willing to fight for the voiceless. So if anyone who's hearing this podcast, I hope that if there is anyone who's interested in a legal profession, that they'll pursue it.
Well, thank you. That's excellent. It's so good for them to understand that. Other thing too is, Latina asked, as far as once you're in college, and what do you recommend for Latinas in college student that once they're done, how can they assure that they land their first job? And how can they continue to grow from there?
So first of all, don't wait until you're done, okay? When you're in college, whether it's your sophomore year, every summer counts. So you have to make sure that as soon as you're a freshman, you're thinking about what are you going to do your freshman summer? What are you going to do the summer of your sophomore year, of your junior year? Because every summer counts. And then secondly, find jobs, whether on campus or elsewhere, that are going to help you build your skills. Be part of organizations. If you want to be the vice president or the president of the Latin American Students Organization, go for it. Be involved. Like I talk to some students and they're like, oh, I don't have any time. Well, don't spend 3 hours on social media. So every single moment counts. I used all my summers. I was the fellowship internship queen. I applied to every fellowship I could lay my hands on, and because you have to hustle. Don't lose the hustle, and that means be clever, be creative. There's so many internships and scholarships out there. Get in touch with your professors, build a relationship. Just don't ask them for a letter of recommendation when you haven't even talked to them. And then reach out sometimes to the alumni network. You'd be surprised. People are willing to make sure that you don't have to go through the same pains that we had to. So don't wait until you're done. And then when you're done with the courses and you've gotten the degree, I hope that you started to look for a job back in January, not in May. So that's important. And then, make sure that you belong to organizations, professional organizations. If you're interested in social work, make sure you are part of the association, National Social Workers Association. If you're a law student, make sure you're part of the Hispanic Bar Association. Incorporate yourself into those professional circles, because that's where you're going to find your job. So there's a lot of tactical planning, but just know, going back to what I said at the beginning, you can't do this alone. You have to ask for help.
That is so true. That's great advice. Yes, definitely. What message would you have to a Latina who wants to see change in her community, but she's not sure how she can do it alone to make it happen?
Yeah, and you shouldn't do it alone. So there are lots of nonprofit organizations. I lead one of the largest nonprofit organizations in the country. But there are so many nonprofit organizations in our community. Organizations that need volunteers. Organizations that need, somebody who can spend a few hours building, designing a new program. Organizations that are hungry for young talent. And I think that you have to start there, So make yourself offer your talents and your time to nonprofit organizations in your community. They're hungry for it. And become part of your community. just living in a community doesn't make you part of the community. So, do that. And then again, find ways to get involved with Unidos US or LULAC or Hispanic Heritage Foundation or YWCA. So you have to be part of something in order to truly be able to move and make change.
That's so true. And volunteering is also another way where you could find a position too. So
yeah,
volunteer, they see you, and I think it's great advice. And I think you may have touched on this question already, but she says, what do you recommend Latinas, how do they start developing their networks when they are too much inside their comfort zone? How do they get out of it, is what she's saying.
So I follow a particular phrase that I came about a few years ago, and I say it all the time, and I always fail to attribute it properly. But the saying goes, if your dreams don't scare you, you're not dreaming big enough. And basically, my goal is to wake up in cold sweats every night because I'm dreaming big. There's nothing more petrifying to me than to be in a comfort zone. And my personality is, I like change. I've had a lot of different positions because I feed from learning and growing. The moment you start feeling comfortable, you're not exercising your muscles, whether it's your mental muscle or your endurance. So I would say to young Latinas, make peace with change. Make peace with making sure that you're pushing the envelope. Because if you're just too comfortable, it can, in my view, it can be more of a barrier. Now, I have a mother who always reminds me, you're working too hard. My nieces tease me and they say, above and beyond. Yeah, that's who I am. I want to go above and beyond, right? It's how you really move the world. You don't move the world by comfort. You move the world by being in uncomfortable situations. And sometimes it'll be lonely. Sometimes you may be the only voice in the room. But if you stay at it, you'd be surprised. Somebody will finally say, oh, remember that idea Terry had 3 years ago? Look how amazing it is. So it's important to always be growing and stretching and feeling uncomfortable sometimes.
Yeah, that's great advice. That is so true.
Yeah.
Let's talk about YWCA. Tell us about I know that there's a strong mission to stop domestic violence, and with the work with empowering women. How much are Latinas not reporting the domestic violence right now in our situation with the country, especially undocumented and non-English speaking?
Yeah, so YWCA, I mean, as I mentioned, we're the oldest women's organization in the country. So we've been around for 162 years. And we do everything from childcare to men's centers, leadership. But one of the areas that we are well known for and that we have a lot of engagement is sexual assault and domestic violence. So we are the largest network providers of domestic violence, support for survivors of domestic violence. And I will tell you, Terry, COVID really, the rate of domestic violence was skyrocketed under COVID, not just in the US, all around the world, which tells us something. Tells us that gender-based violence is still alive and well. And that the circumstances of COVID just layer on so many different issues, right? So if you're in a relationship where there's domestic violence and now you're, social distancing, but you're staying home with your abuser, what do? In our Latino community, there's still a big taboo, right? And there's still a lot of misunderstanding about domestic violence and sexual assault, and we need to empower women, Latinas, and basically say, I believe you, right? I believe you, I support you, I'm here to help. Because sometimes it's that quiet, silent, very, just very devastating reality that we are seeing high rates of domestic violence and sexual assault in our Latino community. So bringing that to light, talking about it, letting women know that, you know, it's not okay to accept this type of abuse, is a conversation that we need to have, especially with our young women, who are starting out with, you know, in relationships, and to be able to tell them that is not, you are not to allow this. So, and when you find yourself in this situation, know that there are resources and people that can help you. And to our young men, because we can't have this conversation just in a unilateral way. We have to talk to our young Latinos, and also help them understand what healthy relationships are all about, and how, you know, it's unacceptable. So there's a lot of work that we need to do in our Latino community, and I'm hoping that through the work of YWCA and other organizations like Esperanza, that this conversation is going to be, it's no longer going to be a taboo, but that we can openly speak about it.
Yeah, definitely true. I think a little bit before the COVID hit, unfortunately, with the current presidential administration, I heard that, well, I also know that there's some situations with undocumented women that are afraid to report it.
Yeah.
You know, locally, I know that we've heard of cases where they were deported for reporting it, and it was wrong. That's totally wrong.
Yeah.
It's really sad. Are there any public policies that are advocating for eliminating domestic abuse?
Oh, absolutely. So the Violence Against Women's Act really is one of the signature legislation, and provides funding for organizations like ours. Now that piece of legislation has to be reauthorized, and it's been sitting in the Senate for the last almost a year now. So we need to bring more attention to that and make sure that that the Congress understands that we can't wait for them to ponder this. These are types of legislations that are very, very important. So the Violence Against Women's Act, also known as VAWA. And then there's a lot of other programs that stem from that provide support to women and their families. Because we also have to understand that women who are experiencing domestic violence, in many cases, they have children who are also observing violence in the home. So at YWCA, we also take a trauma-informed lens, because domestic violence impacts everybody. So how do we make sure that not just in many cases, I'm going to say women, but also their children are well taken care of, and that they can process this and heal, right? So there's lots of programs and legislation out there, but we need more funding because it's not enough. And the unfortunate part is that it's growing. So organizations like ours, we are thankful to foundations like the Allstate Foundation, which has been investing in domestic violence. But we need more partners and more dollars to help provide housing, to help provide support, to help women in their financial areas. So one last thing, one other thing I would say, Terry, is domestic violence is a play on power, right? So abusers who know that a woman may be undocumented or their immigration status is not in line, they will use that as part of the other level of abuse, right? The psychological, emotional abuse. So we need to understand that abuse is not just the physical, but it's also the psychological, the emotional, the financial. So there's a lot of layers to this conversation, and I think that as a Latino community, we need to pay more attention to it.
The other thing too, one of your other missions was to empower Latinas. I know when I was a little girl, I went to YWCA, so this is amazing to listen to all the things that you do. And I went there to have, my mom took me for swimming lessons. So it's more than just a place for, sports lessons or learning how to swim. And so it's great to learn that there's so many other programs there to outreach and to do something with the community. Your other mission is really to empower Latinas, and I know you talk about racism. What are some of the programs you're doing in those areas?
So yeah, so let me go back because you touched on something that we usually say. So not all YWCAs have pools, but we help women when they feel like they're drowning. And that's important because some people may go to a YWCA because they may still have a pool, but most people go for the programs. And as an organization that's focused on eliminating racism and empowering women, we really stand at that intersection of race and gender. And lifting up the voices of women of color is very important. When we talk about racial justice, we're talking about so many ways that racism comes into play. And I'm drawing your attention to, for example, the YWCA of El Paso, right? The YWCA of El Paso is really at the crux of the immigration crises. And then a year ago, as you may remember, somebody drove 600 miles to target brown people and shot over 20 individuals, breaking the community. So those are the forms of and manifestation of racism when we're targeted and when we as Latinos are unable to really fulfill our dreams, have safe communities, pursue our goals, either to be an entrepreneur or to be somebody in the medical field or in the legal field, to be able to really understand that we are the U.S. Not only are we part of it, we are the U.S. We're the fastest growing demographics. We're the youngest demographic. So it's no longer of whether are you American or not. Absolutely. And we are tackling racism from structural racism and institutional racism. That sometimes you don't see it, but you know it's there, and you have to call it out. And that's where we need to be social agents of change, because it's no longer, así son las cosas. No, it's about, are we going to continue it this way, or do we want to redesign it and reimagine it?
Yeah, that's so true. And in abuse too, I know the cases are, when you say emotional, they can also try and have control over your finances. And
oh, absolutely, yeah,
you down and everything, or other abuse. So there's a wheel and everything, but some people think it's just physical, but the emotional can be very traumatic, especially when they have control over your
correct. And that's the work that we do thanks to the Allstate Foundation, financial literacy for survivors of domestic violence, which is, rebuilding your credit because your abuser took out 3 different credit cards under your name, right? So there's a lot to unpack and a lot of understanding, but I'm just very grateful that we have partners like Allstate who are very invested in these programs.
These are excellent programs. How can our audience learn about, where can they find a YWCA in their state?
Yeah.
Is there somewhere they can call directly, or you want me to post a website?
So you can go to our ywca.org website, and then you can right in front, you'll see find your local YWCA. And hopefully we will be not too far from you, from your audience, but just reach out. We have 204 associations across the country, and we touch over 1,300 communities. So I really hope that folks will get involved with YWCA. And if not us, then find a local organization that can really use your help. I always say, you know, organizations need money, but more than money, they need energy. They need people to be invested, to just support. So find the way you want to engage and just go for it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. That is excellent. So it's been great having you guest, but before we end, I want to ask you, what is your favorite quote?
I have so many, as I've already shared with you.
Which one's your favorite one of all those?
Yeah, you know, the one about if your dreams don't scare you, you're not dreaming big enough. Because I use that often to tell folks that your only limitation is up here. You know, I know that there are financial limitations, don't get me wrong. I know that there's many limitations that we inherit. But again, as I mentioned, I had two amazing grandmothers who came from dirt poor communities in rural areas of the Dominican Republic. And I saw how my grandmother would read everything. My maternal grandmother, she was a reader. She read everything, Reader's Digest, and she was hungry. And my paternal grandmother was, you know, strong and also very determined. So I really encourage people that everyone has their journey. I've had my challenges, my heartbreaks, my, you know, life is never easy. But in the midst of that, we have to find our voice and we have to find what we're passionate about. And that takes work. It's not going to come down from the sky. But I encourage folks to just dream big and find it and feel it. And then look for mentors and look for people to ask for help.
Well, thank you, Alejandra, for being our guest. I really appreciate everything you've shared with us, and I think our Latina audience has learned a lot of valuable information. Thank you so much.
And again, visit ywca.org, and I hope that something that I said may touch your listeners. So we are one community, whether you're Mexican, Dominican, Colombian. At the end of the day, we are a very diverse Latino community, and we're here because we love our country.
Yes, we love our country indeed. And this concludes Ask the Latina. So we look forward to you joining us on the next one.